The story begins with the voice of Master Splinter, the wise and disciplined mutant rat, addressing the 4 young warriors he has raised as his own. His students, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each embody a different strength. Leonardo, the calm and focused leader; Raphael, the fierce powerhouse; Donatello, the brilliant strategist; and Michelangelo, the carefree spirit whose love for pizza is unmatched. Splinter speaks with quiet certainty, telling them they are meant for something far greater than the life they currently know. One day, they will defend the innocent people of New York City from dangerous forces like the Foot Clan, a ruthless criminal network led by the deadly warrior known as Shredder. But despite their potential, Splinter insists they are not ready yet. Their training is incomplete, and until the time comes, they must remain hidden beneath the city, confined to the safety of the sewers. Above ground, the scene shifts to the bustling streets of New York, where we meet April O'Neil, a reporter working for Channel 6 Eyewitness News. So far, her career hasn't exactly been thrilling, mostly routine assignments with nothing groundbreaking to her name. Determined to change that, April has been digging into a developing story involving the Foot Clan. Her investigation has led her to believe they're connected to a recent theft of highly restricted chemicals at the docks. Driven by ambition and curiosity, she heads to the docks late at night, hoping to catch something firsthand. Her instincts prove right. She arrives just as the Foot Clan, under the command of their skilled Lieutenant Karai, attempts another heist involving the same dangerous materials. But this time, things don't go according to their plan. Out of nowhere, an unseen force interrupts them. Moving with incredible speed and precision, a mysterious vigilante takes down multiple foot soldiers with ease. The attack is swift, controlled, and overwhelming, forcing the entire group to retreat in disarray. April watches in shock, but she's unable to capture any footage or even clearly see who or what just saved the day. All that remains at the scene is a strange symbol left behind by the unknown defender. It feels oddly familiar to her, though she can't immediately place why. She snaps a photo of it and later presents the story to her boss, Bernadette Thompson. Unfortunately, the pitch falls flat. Without concrete proof or a clear connection to the Foot Clan, Bernadette dismisses it as speculation and refuses to run the story. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the shadows, Karai reports back to Shredder, who is deep in the middle of his intense training. She informs him about the mysterious fighter who disrupted their operation. Shredder doesn't waste time. He immediately devises a calculated plan to draw this unknown enemy out into the open. To flush the vigilante out, the Foot Clan orchestrates a hostage situation inside a subway station, using innocent civilians as bait. Among those captured is April herself. As chaos unfolds, the mysterious protector returns, once again dismantling the Foot Clan with astonishing efficiency. This time, April gets a better look as the figure makes an escape, prompting her to follow them onto a nearby rooftop. What she discovers leaves her completely stunned. Standing before her are not 1, but 4 masked vigilantes, and they're unlike anything she's ever seen. They aren't human, they're mutated warriors. Trying to document the moment, April discreetly raises her camera, but the flash betrays her. In an instant, Raphael reacts, launching a chain that yanks her onto the rooftop. Surrounded by 3 of the turtles, Raphael, Leonardo, and Michelangelo, she's overwhelmed and ordered to hand over her phone. The shock proves too much, and she faints. When she regains consciousness, she finds Donatello beside her, carefully checking to make sure she's unharmed. Once she's steady again, Leonardo steps forward. He has Donatello erase the photo from her phone before returning it to her, a decision that irritates Raphael, who would have preferred to destroy it entirely. Before disappearing into the night, they leave her with a warning: tell no one what she's seen. Then, they vanish back into the hidden world beneath the city. Back in the sewers, their return doesn't go unnoticed. They had left without Splinter's permission, and their attempt to sneak back inside fails immediately. As punishment, Splinter brings them to the Hashia place where discipline is tested through balance and endurance. There, he forces them into difficult positions, demanding they hold steady until one of them confesses the truth. Hours pass, 11 in total, and not one of them breaks. Seeing their stubborn resolve, Splinter changes tactics. He presents what he claims to be a legendary, one-of-a-kind 99 cheese pizza. The temptation proves irresistible for Michelangelo, who quickly cracks under the pressure and spills everything: the encounter with the Foot Clan, the rooftop incident, and most importantly, April O'Neil. Realizing the potential danger, Splinter immediately orders his sons to find April. If she's been seen by the Foot Clan, her life could now be at risk. Back on the surface, April returns home, her mind racing with everything she's witnessed. Searching for answers, she digs through a box of her late father's belongings. Among the items, she discovers a notebook inside it, the exact same symbol left behind by the vigilantes. Alongside the notebook, she finds old video recordings labeled Project Renaissance, filmed in her father's laboratory years ago. As she watches the footage, the truth begins to unfold. The four mysterious vigilantes, Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello, aren't strangers at all. They were once ordinary turtles, and they were part of her father's experiments. The recordings reveal that her father had been working on a scientific breakthrough involving mutagenic compounds. Also appearing in the footage is another key figure, Eric Sachs, now the powerful CEO of Sachs Industries. Desperate for answers, April decides to confront him directly. But before she can do that, she makes one last attempt to share her discovery with her boss. This time, the outcome is even worse. Her claims about mutant turtles are dismissed outright as nonsense, costing her not only credibility, but her job as well. Her cameraman and close friend, Vernon Fenwick, may not believe her story either, but he at least shows concern. Offering his support, he gives her a ride to Sax's estate, where she hopes to finally uncover the truth behind everything. When she arrives, April questions Sax about Project Renaissance. He responds with a story rooted in ancient history, claiming that centuries ago, during a time of great suffering in Japan, a tyrannical warlord poisoned the land, plunging the world into chaos. According to him, a brilliant alchemist eventually created a cure, restoring hope and saving countless lives. Sax explains that this legend inspired both him and April's father to pursue their own version of such a miracle, developing a mutagen designed to enhance cellular regeneration and healing. They conducted experiments using 4 turtles, but the project never reached completion. He claims that all their research, along with every test subject, was lost in the tragic fire that took her father's life. But as the truth quietly lingers beneath the surface, one thing is clear. Those lost experiments are very much alive. Picking up from the shocking discovery, April O'Neil finally pieces everything together and shares the truth with Eric Sachs. She's already crossed paths with the turtles, and not only that, they survived the fire years ago because of her. As a child, she had unknowingly rescued them, along with Master Splinter. Sachs, masking his true intentions behind calm curiosity, urges her to reconnect with them. He insists that if they can locate the turtles, they might finally complete the mutagen research that was lost years ago. Before she leaves, he hands her his business card, offering his help whenever she might need it, though there's something about the gesture that feels a little too convenient. But April doesn't get the chance to make the first move. Donatello tracks her down first, hacking into her system and sending her coordinates for a meeting. Following the trail, she's guided deep beneath the city, descending into the hidden world of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There, she finally comes face to face with Splinter. In that moment, Splinter reflects on the past, revealing a truth far darker than she ever imagined. The fire that destroyed her father's lab wasn't an accident. It was a desperate act. Her father had uncovered Sax's secret alliance with Shredder and the Foot Clan. Realizing the danger of the mutagen falling into the wrong hands, he chose to destroy everything, setting the lab ablaze to erase all evidence. Tragically, he never made it out alive. Moments after the fire began, April had arrived. Acting on instinct, she gathered the turtles and Splinter, carrying them to safety in the sewers. It was there that the mutagen began to take effect, transforming them into what they are today. As the years passed, Splinter took on the role of teacher as well as father. With nothing but determination and a book on ninjutsu he had once found, he trained the turtles from the ground up. What began as survival turned into discipline, and discipline into mastery. Over time, they grew into skilled fighters brothers, bound not just by mutation, but by purpose. But that fragile piece is now under threat. Splinter senses it immediately. If Sax knows they're alive, it won't be long before he brings the fight directly to them. And he's right. Unbeknownst to April, the business card Sax gave her contained a hidden tracker. It leads the Foot Clan straight to their location. Suddenly, the sewer lair is breached. Shredder storms in, now equipped with a terrifying upgraded suit, mechanized armor lined with razor-sharp, magnetically controlled blades. The attack is brutal and swift. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Donatello are quickly overpowered and knocked unconscious. Raphael is buried beneath falling debris, unable to move. Splinter fights with everything he has, but even he is no match for Shredder's enhanced strength. He's beaten down, left barely clinging to life. Believing 3 of the turtles to still be alive, Shredder takes them and orders the lair destroyed. Explosions rip through the underground refuge. Miraculously, April, Raphael, and Splinter survive, but just barely. Splinter is gravely injured, his life hanging by a thread. Still, he refuses to let Raphael stay behind. With what little strength he has left, he urges him to go after his brothers. Using Donatello's last transmitted coordinates, Raphael and April team up with Vernon Fenwick, speeding toward Sax's estate in Vernon's van. Inside the facility, the situation is dire. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Donatello are strapped down, their blood being drained for experimentation. Overseeing the process, Sax reveals his true objective. Within hours, Shredder will release a deadly toxin across New York City. Then, once the chaos reaches its peak, Sax will step in with a cure, an antidote derived from the turtle's blood. In doing so, he and Shredder will position themselves as saviors, gaining total control over the city and bending it to their will. The plan begins to unravel when Raphael crashes through the estate gates with April and Vernon. Charging in, Raphael takes down wave after wave of foot soldiers, but when he comes face to face with Shredder, he's outmatched. Despite his strength, he can't defeat him alone. Meanwhile, Sax manages to escape, taking a container filled with the turtle's blood. Shredder incapacitates Raphael and leaves, allowing the extraction to continue. Just before losing consciousness, Donatello manages to whisper a single word to April, adrenaline. Understanding instantly, she injects the turtles, triggering a surge that revives them. Breaking free from their restraints, they fight their way out. Outside, they're met with heavy gunfire, but it barely slows them down. The bullets bounce harmlessly off their shells. They quickly eliminate the remaining guards and escape in a truck. But their escape turns chaotic when a foot soldier fires an RPG, striking the vehicle and sending it spiraling down a mountainside. As it hurtles toward a deadly drop, the turtles leap out at the last possible second, narrowly avoiding a catastrophic fall. Regrouping quickly, they shift their focus to the final showdown. Their destination, Sax Tower. That's where the antidote is being finalized, and where Shredder has already begun releasing the toxin. Splitting into 2 teams, the turtles head for the rooftop to confront Shredder, while April and Vernon move to stop Sax. Inside, Sax opens fire the moment he sees them, but April and Vernon manage to outmaneuver him. Using quick thinking, April deploys Halon 31, temporarily blinding Sax. Even with an injured shoulder, Vernon steps in and knocks him out cold. April secures the antidote. On the rooftop, the turtles face Shredder, but initially, they fight him one at a time, and it doesn't work. He overwhelms them again and again. It's only when they finally sync together, moving as a unit, that they gain the upper hand. Combining their skills, they launch a coordinated strike that sends Shredder crashing off the building. For a moment, it seems like it's over, but Shredder climbs back up. As Donatello works to shut down the toxin system, Shredder lashes out in fury, slicing through the structure to release it manually. The tower begins to collapse, the entire platform breaking apart beneath them. In the chaos, April risks everything. With the structure falling apart, she has the turtles swing her toward Shredder. At the perfect moment, she strikes, landing a powerful kick that sends him plummeting down into the city below. But the danger isn't over. The platform continues to fall, dragging everyone with it. Hanging in the air, facing what feels like the end, Raphael finally opens up. He admits his fear, his belief that he was never good enough to stand beside his brothers. He apologizes for pushing them away and tells them he loves them. Then, against all odds, they survive the fall. With the toxin threat neutralized and the antidote secured, the turtles return home. There, they use the antidote to save Splinter's life, bringing him back from the brink. The 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles opens with a premise that is deceptively straightforward. New York City exists under mounting pressure. The Foot Clan operates as a pervasive force of intimidation, and April O'Neil is determined to prove she is capable of more than the low-stakes assignments she has been given. She is searching for a story that carries real weight, something consequential, something that matters. That pursuit draws her into the city's hidden layers, where she uncovers a truth that feels almost implausible. The figures confronting the Foot Clan are not conventional vigilantes, but 4 mutated turtles, trained in ninjutsu, living beneath the city alongside their mentor, Splinter. What stands out in this introduction is its reliance on contrast, the grounded, procedural world of journalism colliding with something overtly mythic. The film aims for this revelation to feel like a rupture, a moment where the boundaries of reality begin to shift. Yet it moves past that disbelief with notable bioc, as though it hesitates to fully engage with the strangeness it introduces. The concept invites a pause, a moment of reflection, but the narrative quickly advances instead. On a conceptual level, this is a familiar blueprint. It reflects the kind of origin reconstruction that contemporary studio filmmaking often gravitates toward, revisiting a well-known property, re-establishing its foundation, and presenting it anew for a different generation. There is a certain calculated assurance in that approach, a belief that if the groundwork is clearly defined, everything that follows will naturally align. The film doesn't merely present the turtles as hidden protectors, it weaves their existence directly into April's past, connecting them to her father's experiments, to Eric Sachs, and to the mutagen responsible for their transformation. This decision introduces a personal dimension, but it also narrows the scope of the world being built. Instead of expanding outward, the narrative draws inward, linking its elements through a single, controlled thread rather than allowing them to evolve organically. Rather than positioning April as an outsider encountering something vast and unknown beneath the city, the story reveals that she has always been connected to it. This shift subtly alters the tone. Coincidence is replaced with inevitability. While that can, in theory, deepen emotional resonance, here it also diminishes the sense of discovery. The unknown becomes predetermined. Curiosity gives way to explanation. As a result, the premise unfolds along 2 parallel paths: April's investigation into the truth and the turtles' emergence from isolation into a broader world. One is grounded in inquiry and persistence, the other carries a more mythic weight, centered on hidden figures stepping into visibility. The film attempts to merge these threads, yet their tonal differences remain distinct. Instead of blending seamlessly, they exist in quiet tension. Meanwhile, Shredder and the Foot Clan function as the driving force that compels action. Their role is to apply pressure, to accelerate the narrative. However, even within this initial framework, they feel more like structural components than fully realized presences. They move the story forward, but they rarely deepen it. The plot itself is intentionally uncomplicated. It does not aim to challenge conventions or redefine the genre. It follows a direct, recognizable arc built on discovery, transformation, conflict, and destiny. There is an almost classical simplicity to it, as though the film prioritizes accessibility over intricacy. It wants to be immediately understood, to establish its stakes efficiently, and to maintain a steady forward motion without demanding too much interpretation. At its core, the objective is clear: reintroduce these iconic characters, update their origins, and position them within a large-scale city-centered narrative. In that sense, the film finds both its strengths and its limitations. The opening carries momentum. The mystery surrounding the turtles provides an initial sense of intrigue. April serves as a relatable point of entry into the story. Yet the origin itself feels meticulously constructed, almost overly deliberate in how it aligns every character, every secret, and every piece of backstory. The underlying design becomes visible, and that visibility weakens the illusion of a world that exists beyond the script. Even so, as a foundation, it fulfills its purpose. It brings the turtles back into focus, offers a clear introduction for new audiences, and establishes the framework for a more expansive, modern interpretation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There is a sense of recalibration here, of resetting the narrative landscape so the franchise can progress. Yet in doing so, it never fully captures the unpredictable, almost chaotic energy that originally defined the concept. And once the story begins to advance beyond that setup, a more noticeable issue emerges, one rooted in familiarity. The narrative follows a structure that feels instantly recognizable: a growing threat, a protagonist seeking validation, a concealed group of protectors, and a climactic confrontation that feels foreseeable from early on. These elements are not inherently limiting, but the film adheres to them with such rigidity that deviation never seems possible. There is little sense of risk, little indication that the story might challenge its own direction. The progression becomes linear in a way that reduces tension rather than building it. The audience is not left questioning what might happen next. Instead, they are anticipating what has already been signaled. The predictability is structural, not thematic, and it gradually transforms the experience into something that feels more like execution than discovery. Compounding this is the way the screenplay transitions between moments. Scenes often feel adjacent rather than interconnected. Exposition gives way to action, action to humor, and then back again, without a sustained sense of escalation. The narrative lacks the connective flow that would carry each beat forward with increasing intensity. Instead, it resets itself repeatedly, creating a rhythm that feels segmented rather than continuous. It begins to resemble a sequence of expected milestones rather than a story unfolding with momentum. This is particularly evident in the first half, where the pacing slows in a way that feels less like deliberate buildup and more like inertia. Time is spent establishing context, but not in a manner that heightens anticipation. There is a noticeable imbalance, with early scenes weighed down by explanation. The effort to clarify every detail ultimately restricts the narrative's ability to move with energy. Even as the tempo improves, the writing struggles to find consistency. Dialogue often leans toward functionality, with characters articulating information rather than inhabiting it. Subtext is limited, and conversations frequently prioritize clarity over nuance. When dialogue serves primarily as a vehicle for exposition, it loses its capacity to reveal character. Emotional moments, when they arise, are introduced and resolved with minimal space in between. They appear briefly, acknowledged but not explored, before the story advances to its next objective. Without time to settle, these moments fail to resonate. Significant developments pass without the impact they are positioned to carry, and the stakes never fully reach the level the narrative suggests. It's not that the necessary components are absent, it's that they are never given the space or precision required to resonate. The antagonists illustrate this clearly. Their objective is defined, but it lacks dimensionality or genuine tension. It doesn't carry a lingering sense of psychological presence or unpredictability. Instead, it exists as a problem that must simply be resolved. And when the central conflict feels like an obligation rather than a credible threat, the narrative inevitably loses its sense of urgency. What remains is something procedural, measured, but never truly pressing. The script continues to move forward, but it rarely accumulates weight. It progresses without evolving. It delivers the framework of a story, yet never quite achieves the depth that allows it to endure. And that is where the frustration lies. Beneath the surface, there is unmistakable potential. The world, the characters, the underlying concept all suggest something more refined, more cohesive, more engaging. There are brief moments where that alignment becomes visible, where the film feels as though it might fully realize its own ambitions. But those moments are fleeting. The film ultimately settles into functionality. It tells its story, fulfills its structural obligations, and reaches its conclusion, but it never fully connects. At the center of this structure is April O'Neil, positioned as the grounding force of the narrative. From the outset, the film places her at its core, not merely as the audience's point of entry, but as the driving presence behind the story itself. She is a reporter striving to be taken seriously, pursuing a meaningful lead in a city saturated with noise, attempting to assert credibility in an environment that consistently dismisses her perspective. The intention is clear. This is the classic underdog framework, the outsider who recognizes what others refuse to acknowledge, the singular voice challenging a system that resists inconvenient truths. There is inherent tension within that idea, a natural conflict between truth and perception that should continuously shape her choices. Ideally, each step she takes would carry tangible risk, both professionally and personally, creating a sense of investment that anchors the audience even as the narrative becomes increasingly unconventional. Conceptually, this is a compelling foundation. A character navigating credibility while uncovering something extraordinary has the potential to carry significant emotional weight. Yet the execution never fully reaches that potential. The performance, particularly in how the character is framed, becomes a focal point of discussion. April is rarely afforded moments of stillness or introspection opportunities where her internal state can be observed and understood. Instead, she is frequently propelled from one scenario to the next, reacting to events rather than shaping their emotional trajectory. At times, her role feels primarily functional. She delivers information, facilitates progression, responds when necessary, but seldom moves beyond those requirements. When a character is positioned as the emotional anchor yet lacks the space to fully embody that role, the narrative begins to feel subtly imbalanced. There is a certain rigidity in the portrayal, especially in the earlier portions where she is expected to carry both narrative and emotional weight. It is not solely a matter of dialogue, but of presence, the way a character occupies a moment, engages with their surroundings, and reflects internal shifts through subtle expression. Those layers feel restrained here, and that restraint creates a disconnect. The film asks for investment in her determination, her frustration, her sense of being overlooked, yet those emotions are not consistently conveyed with the depth required to fully resonate. The intention is clear, but the impact remains distant. There are, however, moments where the character approaches clarity. Brief instances where a sense of self-awareness emerges, where the film acknowledges her position, a journalist dismissed as unreliable, pursuing a narrative others refuse to consider. In these flashes, there is a glimpse of a more grounded and active presence, a version of April who could have shaped her own trajectory with greater authority and emotional responsiveness. Yet these moments pass quickly, never fully developed into something that could anchor the story in a lasting way. The potential is present, but it is continually interrupted by the film's insistence on forward momentum. As the narrative advances, a noticeable shift occurs. April gradually moves away from the center of attention. Once the turtles fully emerge, the focus transitions toward them, their presence, their interactions, their dynamic. This shift is not only structural, but tonal. The film becomes more expansive, more energetic, more willing to embrace its own identity. It feels almost intentional, as though the narrative itself recognizes where its strengths lie and begins to gravitate in that direction. This transition does not render April irrelevant, but it does diminish her centrality. She becomes a connective element between key moments rather than the emotional lens through which those moments are experienced. She remains important to the mechanics of the plot, yet she never fully evolves into the core the film seems to require. And in a story that initially depends so heavily on her perspective, that absence becomes increasingly noticeable. Without a firmly established anchor, even the more engaging elements begin to feel slightly detached from a deeper emotional foundation. And then, eventually, the film introduces what it has been holding back, the turtles themselves. For a considerable portion of the runtime, they remain at a distance, suggested through fragments and brief glimpses. Their presence felt more than fully seen. This delayed reveal is designed to build anticipation, to create a sense of intrigue. Yet it also leaves a noticeable gap, as though the film is withholding its most compelling element. When they finally step into focus, the energy shifts immediately. The pacing accelerates, the tone gains confidence, and the interactions begin to feel more dynamic. These are not reserved or enigmatic figures. They are expressive, unpredictable, and unapologetically vibrant. They move with urgency, speak over one another, engage in rapid exchanges that feel intentionally unstructured, closer to the rhythm of genuine siblings than to carefully composed dialogue. They do not simply participate in the narrative. They redefine it. This is the point at which the film begins to align more closely with its own identity. There is a newfound looseness, a willingness to embrace the inherent absurdity of its premise, an energy that had been largely absent before their arrival. Each character carries a distinct presence. Leonardo embodies leadership, striving to maintain cohesion within an inherently chaotic environment, while quietly navigating the pressure that accompanies that role. Raphael introduces intensity and confrontation, his outward aggression hinting at an underlying restlessness that remains largely unexamined but consistently present. Donatello leans into intellect and innovation, his technical focus shaping both his behavior and his visual identity, adding a unique texture to the group dynamic. And Michelangelo operates as the unpredictable element, the one who disrupts tension with humor, sometimes precisely, sometimes unevenly, yet always contributing a vitality that prevents the group from becoming overly weighted. Together, they bring a sense of immediacy and character that the earlier portions of the film struggle to sustain, offering glimpses of the energy and identity the narrative had been building toward all along. What becomes particularly striking is how long the film hesitates before fully centering the very characters it is named after. For a significant portion of the runtime, the Turtles feel less like the foundation of the narrative and more like a destination the story is gradually approaching. They are framed almost as a payoff rather than the core itself, and that delay carries weight. Because once they finally occupy the forefront, it becomes immediately clear this is where the film finds its most natural rhythm. Not within the human-centered drama, nor within the dense layers of exposition or carefully constructed backstory, but within the unfiltered energy of four brothers interacting with one another. There is an inherent watchability to them, a quality that is both immediate and undeniable. Their presence alone introduces momentum. Even in moments where the surrounding material feels less assured, they bring movement, personality, and a sense of unpredictability that elevates the scene. They inject vitality into sequences that might otherwise feel static. When they share the screen, there is a rhythm that emerges, unstructured, overlapping, occasionally chaotic, yet consistently engaging. It is not refined, and it does not need to be. In fact, that lack of refinement becomes part of its appeal. Their exchanges feel spontaneous, as though they are unfolding in real time rather than being carefully orchestrated. There is a sense that anything could emerge from their interactions. And yet, despite this strength, there remains a lingering sense that the film never fully allows them the space they deserve. This is not simply a matter of screen time, but of depth. We are shown glimpses of who they are, but rarely given the opportunity to remain with them long enough for those identities to fully develop. The narrative repeatedly redirects them, back into action, back into spectacle, back into the demands of plot, when what it truly required was stillness, space, moments where they could simply exist, because it is within those quieter exchanges, when they speak, joke, debate, or challenge one another, that they begin to transcend their visual construction. They move beyond being digital creations and begin to feel grounded, even relatable, despite the inherent absurdity of their premise. That is the quality the film occasionally reaches, but never fully embraces. At its essence, what has always distinguished Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is not solely its action, but its sense of brotherhood. These characters are not just a team, they are a family. And while the film acknowledges this on a surface level, it rarely explores it with the depth it deserves. Leonardo retains his role as the composed leader, striving to maintain cohesion under pressure. Raphael embodies intensity, driven by both frustration and loyalty. Within the tension between those two, discipline and emotion, there is the outline of something far more compelling, something the film gestures toward but never fully examines. Donatello represents intellect, leaning into logic, innovation, and technical problem-solving, while Michelangelo serves as the counterbalance, the source of spontaneity, humor, and kinetic energy that prevents the group from becoming overly rigid. Individually, their identities are unmistakable. The film ensures clarity through design, dialogue, and behavior, at times emphasizing these traits to the point of certainty. However, recognition is not synonymous with depth. While each character is clearly defined, the relationships between them are less thoroughly developed. Their interactions, moments of conflict, humor, and tension are present, but often abbreviated or interrupted. The film acknowledges that these dynamics exist, yet it treats them as surface texture rather than as evolving substance. As a result, their exchanges do not accumulate into something lasting. They reset rather than build. The narrative rarely allows them to simply exist together as brothers, outside the immediate demands of action or progression. And that absence becomes significant. Because brotherhood is not solely expressed through conflict or coordination, it is revealed in the in-between moments. The pauses, the casual conversations, the seemingly inconsequential interactions that quietly define connection. Earlier interpretations of these characters understood the importance of that stillness, moments where they could sit together, share space, engage in lighthearted exchanges, or simply coexist. Those scenes may not advance the plot, but they enrich the world. They transform relationships from constructed elements into something that feels lived in. Here, such moments are limited. Yet when they do appear, the shift is immediate. The energy becomes more natural, the dialogue more fluid, the interactions more believable. The characters feel less like participants in a narrative and more like individuals inhabiting it. In those instances, the bond between them begins to take shape in a way that feels genuine. But the film rarely lingers. It returns quickly to scale, to momentum, to spectacle. These quieter sequences are treated almost as deviations rather than essential foundations. The result is a portrayal of brotherhood that is clearly present but not fully realized. The care they have for one another is evident. There are indications of loyalty, of shared experience, of mutual reliance. Yet these elements never fully settle into something emotionally tangible. They are suggested rather than deeply felt. And that is where the sense of missed potential becomes most apparent. The foundation is undeniably strong, the personalities, the dynamic, the inherent chemistry. The film simply does not grant them the time required to evolve into something more cohesive, more resonant, more enduring. This brings us to Splinter, the figure traditionally positioned as the emotional center of this world. Across iterations, Splinter has functioned as more than a mentor. He is a father figure, a stabilizing presence, the source of both discipline and understanding. He offers not only instruction, but perspective. He provides context, meaning, and emotional grounding. In this interpretation, however, his presence shifts in tone. He is portrayed with greater intensity, a stronger emphasis on control and authority. His role leans heavily toward discipline, often at the expense of warmth. Where one might expect patience and quiet guidance, there is instead a sense of rigidity, an approach that can feel distant, at times even severe. He corrects more often than he comforts, instructs more than he connects. This adjustment subtly alters the dynamic of the group. When the central parental figure feels less emotionally accessible, the sense of family begins to weaken. The turtles' bond, already limited in its development, loses an additional layer of grounding. The balance between structure and empathy shifts, leaving the emotional framework of the group feeling incomplete. To its credit, the film does attempt to introduce moments of softness as the narrative progresses. There are brief instances where a more familiar paternal quality emerges, where Splinter appears more supportive, more aligned with the version audiences recognize. In those moments, there is a glimpse of the character as both teacher and guide, someone who imparts not just technique, but purpose. Yet these moments are not sustained. They feel intermittent rather than foundational, adjustments rather than a defining presence. He never fully transitions into the emotional core the story seems to require. Instead, he remains primarily functional, guiding the narrative, facilitating progression, fulfilling structural needs. And that absence is significant. Because Splinter is not merely a supporting figure, he is the foundation upon which the turtles' identity is built. He is the connective force that binds them, the emotional anchor that gives their actions meaning. Without that fully realized presence, the film continues to move forward. But it does so without the deeper sense of cohesion and emotional resonance that could have elevated it into something far more impactful. That absence becomes increasingly apparent in the way the relationships never fully settle into something emotionally cohesive. And then the narrative turns to the figure meant to carry the weight of opposition, the central force designed to challenge everything the story is building toward, Shredder. Conceptually, this should be the most immediate success. He is an iconic presence, defined by legacy and expectation. He is positioned as the ultimate counterbalance to the turtles, a figure who should dominate not only through physical capability, but through psychological influence. A presence that feels inevitable, as though his impact cannot be resolved through strength alone. Visually, the film makes a deliberate effort. This interpretation of Shredder is constructed to intimidate, encased in dense armor, layered with sharp metallic edges that transform him into something closer to a weapon than a person. The design leans into exaggeration, presenting him as an almost mechanical force, something engineered to overwhelm. When he enters a scene, the imagery is immediate, assertive, designed to command attention. But that visual intensity is where much of his presence begins and ends. Beyond the exterior, there is limited depth. His personality remains underdefined, his presence lacking the memorability that a character of this stature typically demands. There is no strong ideological framework guiding his actions, no clearly articulated motivation that adds dimension to his role. He exists primarily as a physical challenge rather than a narrative force. Instead of shaping the story around him, he becomes an obstacle within it, and that distinction is critical. A compelling antagonist does more than oppose the protagonist. They generate tension, influence decisions, and alter the trajectory of the narrative. Their presence should be felt even in their absence, creating an undercurrent of anticipation that carries through every scene. Here, that tension never fully develops. Shredder appears, creates moments of impact, presents a formidable image, but the connection remains surface level. There is little curiosity surrounding him, little desire to understand his perspective. The focus shifts toward the confrontation rather than the character. The broader structure surrounding him does little to reinforce his role. The overarching plan is present, but it lacks layering and progression. There is minimal sense of escalation, no evolving complexity that suggests the heroes are facing something adaptive or strategically dynamic. The conflict exists to propel the story forward, rather than to challenge it in meaningful ways. As a result, the narrative loses a degree of urgency. Without a sense of depth or unpredictability, the stakes remain defined, but not fully felt. Shredder never quite achieves the presence of a looming force. He is visible, but not pervasive. There is little indication that he is orchestrating events beyond immediate encounters, shaping outcomes, or controlling the broader landscape, and that absence subtly weakens the narrative. A character like this is meant to cast a shadow over the entire story, not simply emerge during moments of confrontation. By the time the final encounter arrives, the scale is undeniable, but the impact is restrained. The sequence is expansive, visually constructed to convey intensity, yet it lacks the emotional accumulation that would give it weight. The choreography suggests danger, the imagery suggests escalation, but the underlying tension has not been fully established. Without that build-up, the resolution feels less earned. And this is where the missed opportunity becomes most evident. With a more fully realized antagonist, the entire narrative could have carried greater momentum, each preceding moment layered with pressure, each decision shaped by a more compelling sense of opposition. Instead, Shredder fulfills the visual expectation without fully embodying the role. He is designed to intimidate, but not developed to resonate, and that gap remains unresolved. From there, the film leans into what becomes its defining element, its reliance on visual effects. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 does not simply incorporate CGI, it constructs its identity around it. Every major sequence, every interaction involving the turtles is mediated through this digital framework. The film is not merely enhanced by visual effects, it is fundamentally shaped by them. On a technical level, this is where the film often excels. The turtles move with a convincing sense of weight and momentum. Their motion carries intention. Each step, each impact, each shift in direction feels grounded in a physical logic. The fluidity of their movement allows for a dynamic range that earlier interpretations could not achieve. There is articulation in the smallest gestures, subtle shifts in posture and expression that contribute to a sense of presence within the frame. These are not constrained representations, they are fully realized digital figures operating at scale. And that freedom extends into the staging of the action itself. The sequences become more expansive, more kinetic. The turtles navigate environments with speed and force, interacting with the world in ways that emphasize both agility and impact. The camera follows with a similar freedom, moving through spaces with a fluidity that enhances the sense of immersion. From a technological perspective, it represents a significant advancement. It demonstrates the extent to which visual effects have evolved, allowing filmmakers to approach action and choreography with fewer limitations. The potential is evident in how these sequences are constructed, yet this same emphasis introduces complexity. While the movement is effective, the design does not resonate universally. These turtles are intentionally enlarged, physically imposing, heavily built, their proportions exaggerated to amplify their presence. They are designed to feel formidable, almost monumental. For some, this reinforces their strength and modernizes their image. For others, it creates distance, replacing familiarity with something more imposing and less immediately approachable. Facial design becomes a particular point of tension. The film pursues a level of realism in texture and detail that occasionally conflicts with the expressive qualities the characters require. There are moments where this detail enhances the illusion, where the subtlety of movement and expression draws attention to the craftsmanship involved. But there are also moments where it disrupts engagement, reminding the viewer of the constructed nature of what they are seeing. Instead of consistently reinforcing emotional connection, the realism can compete with it. The audience is asked to engage with these characters on a personal level, yet the visual presentation does not always facilitate that connection. At times, the distinction between character and construction becomes too visible. This creates an unusual dynamic. The film aims for emotional accessibility, yet the design leans toward technical impressiveness. The result is a balance that does not always hold. The detail adds depth, but also introduces a degree of separation. However, when all elements align, the motion, the vocal performance, the timing, there are moments where the illusion becomes seamless. The personalities beneath the digital layer emerge with clarity. The interactions feel authentic, the emotional cues land with greater precision, and the characters momentarily transcend their visual framework. In those instances, the analysis fades, replaced by genuine engagement. The challenge is consistency. At times, the turtles integrate naturally within their environment, occupying space with a convincing sense of presence. At other points, the cohesion falters. The integration between digital elements and physical surroundings shifts, creating moments where they feel slightly removed from the world they inhabit. Lighting, composition, and spatial interaction vary in effectiveness, and that variation becomes noticeable. The result is a visual experience that oscillates, impressive in execution, yet uneven in its ability to fully sustain immersion. That inconsistency makes sustained immersion more difficult, as the film never fully settles into a singular visual identity. Its aesthetic becomes both an advantage and a limitation, advancing the franchise in scale and technical ambition, yet sacrificing a degree of simplicity and inherent charm in the process. It is undeniably larger, louder, and more intricately detailed, but not always more convincing. The trade-off becomes clear. Spectacle is prioritized over subtlety, impact over intimacy. From there, the film leans into what it most clearly defines itself by: action. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 does not merely incorporate action, it is structured around it. Action becomes its primary language, the central mechanism through which it communicates excitement, progression, and stakes. Once the narrative accelerates, it rarely allows itself to decelerate. Explosions, pursuits, rooftop confrontations, cascading environments, they arrive in rapid succession, often layered one upon another with minimal pause. At a glance, this approach appears effective, and in certain moments, it is. The scale is expansive, the movement carries speed, and the turtles navigating these sequences together delivers the kinetic energy expected from a contemporary blockbuster. There are instances where the spectacle aligns with intent, where the choreography, camera motion, and sheer volume of activity create a rush that feels immediate and engaging. The ambition is evident, a clear attempt to craft sequences that are visually commanding. Yet as these moments accumulate, their limitations begin to surface. The film equates constant intensity with escalation, and in doing so overlooks the distinction between the two. Rather than building toward moments, sequences often unfold in isolation, one burst of activity giving way to another without a clear progression of tension. The result is a rhythm that becomes relentless, not in a way that heightens engagement, but in a way that gradually diminishes it. There is little opportunity for contrast. The narrative rarely pauses to establish anticipation, to allow tension to form before release. Without that foundation, the action begins to lose its edge. It remains visually assertive, but emotionally muted. The absence of build-up transforms what should feel impactful into something that simply occurs. This is where the central issue emerges. The action presents intensity, but it does not consistently translate into felt intensity. Characters endure collisions, navigate hazards, and move through increasingly improbable scenarios, yet the rapid pacing prevents these moments from settling. There is minimal sense of consequence. Each event resolves almost as quickly as it appears, creating a cycle of constant reset that gradually erodes the stakes. When every sequence operates at maximum scale, none are given the space to feel singularly significant. The result is a narrative that operates at a sustained peak, leaving little room for true escalation. What should feel climactic begins to resemble a plateau. The extended snowbound pursuit sequence exemplifies this dynamic. It is expansive, visually dense, and technically ambitious. Yet as it continues, its impact begins to diminish. The repetition of motion, the blurred sense of stakes, and the duration itself gradually reduce its effectiveness. The audience observes movement but does not fully experience the tension that should accompany it. At this stage, spectacle begins to work against the film. Instead of amplifying engagement, it disperses it. Rather than building anticipation, it creates fatigue. Action, at its most effective, draws the viewer inward. It sharpens focus, heightens awareness, and creates a sense of immediacy. Here, it often achieves the opposite effect, introducing a distance between the viewer and the experience. The distinction lies in emotional connection. When the narrative does not clearly establish what is at risk, who is vulnerable, or why a moment matters, the action becomes detached from meaning. It transforms into visual momentum without emotional grounding, movement without consequence, energy without direction. This does not suggest that the film is without effective moments. There are sequences where coordination between the turtles becomes apparent, where their movement reflects cohesion and purpose. In these instances, the choreography gains clarity, and the action briefly achieves a balance between scale and readability. These glimpses reveal what the film is capable of, a synthesis of spectacle and intention. However, such moments are not sustained. They are absorbed into the broader intensity rather than defining it. The film continues to pursue greater scale and speed, without recognizing that restraint could have enhanced impact. Without contrast, without measured pacing, even the most elaborate sequences lose their ability to resonate. Because ultimately, spectacle alone cannot carry emotional weight. Without tension, without clearly defined stakes, the visual scale has little to anchor itself to. It becomes motion rather than meaning, and in that transition, the experience begins to feel hollow despite its constant activity. Amidst this, the film turns toward another defining element, its use of humor. Regardless of the scale or intensity, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has always relied on personality as its grounding force. Not merely visual distinction or action, but the sense that these characters exist beyond the demands of the plot that they possess. Individual voices, idiosyncrasies, and a dynamic that feels active even in stillness. This quality emerges most clearly through their interactions. As the turtles engage with one another, the tone shifts. The film becomes lighter, more fluid, more intentionally unstructured. Dialogue overlaps, timing becomes less rigid, and exchanges unfold with a degree of spontaneity. The interactions feel less composed and more immediate, capturing a sense of lived-in familiarity. This is where the film most closely aligns with its core identity. The turtles are not solely defined as combatants. They are, fundamentally, adolescents navigating their own dynamic. That energy is reflected in the humor. It is impulsive, occasionally uneven, at times disruptive, yet it carries an authenticity that aligns with the concept of four brothers still defining themselves. Michelangelo, in particular, becomes the primary conduit for this tone. His humor is unrestrained, quick, irregular, and often detached from the immediate context. At its best, it provides a release, cutting through intensity with a sense of spontaneity that feels natural. At other times, it falters with timing or placement that does not fully align with the surrounding moment. This variability extends across the film's comedic approach. There are instances where the humor resonates effectively and others where it feels less integrated. Yet when it succeeds, it reveals something essential. The elevator sequence stands out as a clear example, brief, contained, and entirely detached from narrative urgency. It allows the characters to exist without pressure, to engage in a moment that is purely about interaction rather than progression. In that confined space, without external stakes, the dynamic becomes more apparent. The conversation unfolds naturally, the timing feels unforced, and the characters momentarily transcend their narrative function. It is a rare instance where the film pauses long enough to let them simply be, and in doing so, it captures a sense of authenticity that the broader narrative only intermittently achieves, and that is precisely why it lingers. Those moments stand out not because the humor itself is especially intricate, but because the context allows it to unfold naturally. The film pauses just long enough to let the interaction exist without urgency, and that restraint creates a sense of authenticity that resonates far more than the scale surrounding it. Yet that balance is not consistently maintained. Alongside those effective exchanges are moments where the humor feels constructed rather than organic lines that arrive with visible intent, positioned exactly where expected, delivered with a sense of obligation rather than spontaneity. In these instances, the attempt to relieve tension instead exposes the unevenness of the tone. The humor no longer feels integrated into the world, but layered onto it. This reveals the central tension the film struggles to resolve. It aims to operate across multiple tonal registers simultaneously, seeking to be light and serious, playful and intense, self-aware yet dramatic. Instead of blending these elements into a cohesive whole, it often transitions between them abruptly. A high-stakes sequence is followed immediately by a comedic beat that disrupts, rather than complements, the tension. The shifts are not always earned, they feel imposed rather than emerging naturally from the moment. Still, when the humor aligns with the characters, it achieves something essential. It humanizes them. It reminds the audience that beneath the visual complexity and constant motion, these are still four brothers navigating their dynamic in real time. It adds dimension to their personalities, allowing them to exist as individuals rather than as purely functional roles within the narrative. And it becomes increasingly clear that the film would have benefited from more of this. More space for interaction, more room for personality to shape the tone, more moments where character not spectacle defines the experience. At the same time, there is another presence that subtly shapes nearly every aspect of the film. Even without direct authorship, the influence of Michael Bay is unmistakable. It is embedded in the structure, in the pacing, in the visual language. It defines how scenes are assembled, how the camera moves, and how the action escalates. There is a persistent drive toward amplification, a tendency to push each moment toward greater scale, greater intensity, greater immediacy. The film rarely allows itself to settle. Instead, it advances with a continuous surge of energy, prioritizing impact over progression, immediacy over gradual development. It does not simply present its narrative, it delivers it with force. This approach manifests through a dense visual style, rapid editing, extensive digital effects, expansive destruction, metallic textures, and heightened physicality. The camera is in near constant motion, searching for the next angle, the next dynamic composition. While this creates a sense of momentum, it can also introduce disorientation. The emphasis shifts from guiding attention to overwhelming it. For audiences familiar with Transformers, the resemblance becomes apparent. The action often evolves into movement without clarity, events unfolding simultaneously across the frame, yet without a clear focal point. The spectacle is expansive, but not always coherent. The viewer observes scale but struggles at times to fully process it. To its credit, the film does exercise restraint in isolated moments. It is more contained than some comparable productions, occasionally allowing a scene to unfold without excessive layering. These instances demonstrate that a different balance is possible. However, they remain exceptions within a broader pattern. The underlying philosophy remains consistent, an emphasis on scale over nuance, on volume over precision, on the assumption that greater magnitude inherently enhances engagement. This approach injects energy into the film. It ensures constant motion, prevents stagnation, and maintains a high level of visual stimulation. There is always something happening, always a sense of forward momentum. Yet that same momentum introduces limitation. The continuous push toward spectacle leaves minimal space for quieter elements, for character exploration, for emotional depth, for moments that rely on stillness rather than scale. The film rarely trusts absence. It rarely allows silence to carry meaning or pauses to create anticipation. Instead of building tension, it often bypasses it, moving directly to impact. Moments that could develop gradually are compressed into immediacy. Everything is heightened, everything accelerated, and over time, that intensity begins to merge into a single continuous experience. Distinct peaks lose their definition because they arrive in such close succession. This becomes the central issue. When every sequence strives to be the most impactful, none are given the opportunity to stand apart. The narrative transforms into a sustained surge of energy, lacking the variation that would create contrast and emphasis. Without that variation, even the most elaborate sequences begin to feel uniform. Gradually, the identity of the film shifts. What begins as a story centered on four distinct personalities evolves into something more aligned with large-scale spectacle. The focus moves away from character-driven interaction and toward momentum defined by scale and speed. The emotional core becomes less pronounced as the visual framework takes precedence. and this shift extends into the film's broader reinterpretation of its world. The decision to modernize is not limited to aesthetics, it reshapes the structure itself. This is not simply a visual update, but a reconfiguration of how these characters exist within their environment. The world around them is more immediate, more interconnected, reflecting a contemporary landscape defined by constant communication and rapid information flow. Technology is not incidental, it is integral. Screens, systems, and networks actively influence how events unfold, how characters interact, and how conflicts are resolved. The setting becomes distinctly current, anchored in a recognizable present. This introduces clarity and accessibility, but it also alters the atmosphere. Earlier interpretations carried a sense of timelessness, existing slightly outside specific eras. Here, that ambiguity is replaced with precision. The environment is sharper, more defined, but less abstract, less open to interpretation. Even the Foot Clan reflects this shift. Their presence becomes more structured, more organized, less enigmatic. They operate with a sense of coordination that aligns with modern systems rather than mythic tradition. The threat they represent feels engineered rather than mysterious, clear in function, but reduced in atmosphere. And at the center of this transformation lies the most significant change, the reworking of the origin itself. The film does not simply revisit the backstory, it reconstructs it, weaving connections that unify every major element. The turtles are no longer an isolated phenomenon. They are directly linked to April's past, to her father's research, to the experiments that shaped them. Everything becomes interconnected. Characters, events, motivations, each component folds into a single, cohesive origin point. The narrative prioritizes cohesion and clarity, ensuring that every piece aligns within a unified structure. That approach reflects a distinctly contemporary storytelling philosophy. The idea that every element should interlock, that coincidence should be reduced, and that origin should feel intentional rather than incidental. It creates a sense of narrative precision, where nothing appears random and every thread is deliberately placed. Structurally, that can be satisfying. It provides clarity, a defined trajectory, a story that feels carefully shaped. But it also introduces a divide in how the film is received. On one side, it offers cohesion. It strengthens the personal dimension, ensures that events carry a sense of purpose, and frames the narrative as something thoughtfully constructed rather than loosely assembled. It gives the audience a clear pathway through the story, making each development feel justified within a controlled framework. On the other, it begins to feel excessive. In striving to explain everything, it replaces curiosity with certainty. It resolves questions that may not have required resolution. The original appeal of the turtles was rooted in a kind of simplicity, mutated figures existing in the margins, separate from the conventional world. There was an inherent unpredictability to that concept, a sense that their existence did not fully align with the rules surrounding them. That separation created intrigue. Here, that intrigue is exchanged for clarity. Every element is accounted for, every connection defined. In tightening the narrative, the film narrows its own sense of scale. The world does not expand, it contracts. The randomness that once suggested possibility is replaced with a visible structure, a sense of design that governs everything. The same principle applies to the technological updates. They bring the story firmly into a contemporary setting. Systems are faster, interactions more immediate, the environment more aligned with a modern audience. On a functional level, this enhances accessibility, but tonally, it shifts the experience. The slightly offbeat, unpredictable quality that once defined the world becomes less prominent. The edges are smoothed, the imperfections reduced. What remains is something more refined, but also more constructed. The film becomes sharper, yet less distinctive. It trades a degree of individuality for consistency, and that trade-off defines much of the film's identity. It prioritizes modernization over mystery, connection over coincidence, structure over simplicity. It favors clarity, control, and immediacy. At times, this works. It creates a version of the story that is easy to follow, immediate in its appeal, and accessible across a wide audience. But it also suggests that something less tangible has been diminished in the process. That intangible element becomes even more apparent when viewed through the lens of nostalgia. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is not simply a franchise, it carries a legacy shaped by multiple generations. It exists not only as a series of stories, but as a collection of experiences tied to memory and familiarity. The earlier interpretations, animated series, comics, and films, were not just entertainment, they were formative for many viewers. They defined how these characters were perceived, how they were understood, and how they were remembered. This reinterpretation inevitably engages with that history. For some, it succeeds in maintaining continuity. The core identities remain recognizable. The dynamic between the turtles persists, and the fundamental concept is preserved. There is a visible effort to retain the essence of what came before while presenting it within a more contemporary framework. It does not discard the past, it reshapes it. For others, that same effort highlights the challenge. Nostalgia is not limited to visuals or narrative. It is tied to feeling. Tone, pacing, texture, even imperfections all contribute to that experience. Earlier versions carried a certain looseness, a willingness to embrace their own eccentricities. They were imperfect, occasionally uneven, but defined by energy and personality. This version operates differently. It is more expansive, more polished, more aligned with the expectations of modern large-scale productions. It seeks to compete within a landscape defined by spectacle. In doing so, it refines its edges, but also softens some of the qualities that once made it distinctive. This is where the division becomes most apparent. For some viewers, the film represents a respectful evolution, a way to introduce the turtles to a new audience while preserving their core identity. For others, it underscores the difficulty of revisiting something deeply familiar and capturing the same emotional resonance. There is also an underlying sense that the film exists as part of a broader cycle, not necessarily driven by a singular narrative necessity, but by the natural progression of a franchise returning to relevance. That does not inherently diminish its value, but it does influence perception. When a project feels guided more by reintroduction than by reinvention, that distinction becomes perceptible. Yet even within that framework, the film does not entirely lose its connection to its origins. The turtles, in certain moments, retain their defining qualities. Their humor, their dynamic, their individual personalities. These elements remain present, though often fragmented. The intention to honor that legacy is visible, even if it is not consistently realized. What emerges is a film positioned between identities. It is simultaneously a continuation, a reinterpretation, and a reflection of the challenges inherent in revisiting something iconic. It never fully resolves into one form. Instead, it occupies a space between tribute and reinvention. And when viewed from a broader perspective, its objective becomes clearer. This is not a film designed around depth or complexity. It is not attempting to redefine its genre or introduce a fundamentally new perspective. Its purpose is more direct. It is built around accessibility. It aims to deliver an experience that is immediate, engaging, and easily understood. From its pacing to its humor to its emphasis on large-scale action, every element is structured for approachability. It prioritizes momentum over reflection, stimulation over nuance. The experience is designed to be consumed in the moment, to engage attention without requiring extended contemplation. In that sense, it aligns with the idea of a contemporary blockbuster, an experience intended to be engaging in real time, offering enjoyment without demanding sustained analysis afterward. And for certain audiences, this approach is effective. Younger viewers, in particular, are likely to connect with its energy. The characters are amplified, their presence heightened, their interactions immediate. The action is constant, the humor direct, the narrative straightforward. There is minimal resistance in how the story unfolds. Even for casual viewers, there is a certain appeal in that clarity. The film communicates its intentions clearly. It offers a defined experience, one that can be engaged with easily and understood without effort. It's the kind of experience that asks very little of its audience. There are no dense thematic layers to navigate, no intricate character arcs to follow, just motion, humor, and spectacle presented with immediacy. It invites a kind of passive engagement, where the focus remains on the surface, and deeper analysis is entirely optional. In that sense, it succeeds. It delivers an experience that is accessible, undemanding, and easy to absorb in the moment. But that same accessibility introduces its limitation. When a film leans too heavily into effortless entertainment, it risks leaving little behind. It provides the experience, but not the imprint. It satisfies in the present, yet rarely lingers beyond it. The engagement is immediate but not enduring. Once it concludes, there is little that remains, no lasting emotional resonance, no moment that continues to echo beyond the runtime. And that is where this film ultimately settles. It is engaging without being impactful, enjoyable without being meaningful. It operates effectively within its duration, yet it does not evolve into something that stays with the viewer. The experience is self-contained, beginning and ending within its own boundaries. Tonally, it avoids deeper commitment. It remains light where it could have explored emotion, expansive where it could have built tension, and in constant motion where stillness might have allowed meaning to settle. The energy is sustained, but it rarely translates into something memorable. The forward momentum, while consistent, prevents the film from ever fully grounding itself in moments that might resonate more deeply. That said, there is a clear place for films of this nature. Not every narrative requires complexity or thematic weight. There is value in delivering a fast, visually dynamic experience designed purely for enjoyment. When simplicity is intentional, it can be effective. And for a specific audience, this film fulfills that purpose. It understands its accessibility, even if it does not extend beyond it. Beyond the narrative itself, there is a distinct layer of technical construction that supports the entire experience. Even when the storytelling falters, the craftsmanship behind the film remains visible. There is a consistent effort to maintain engagement through execution alone, a sense that the production is working continuously to sustain momentum. Visually, the film is refined. The cinematography fulfills its function, capturing scale, movement, and the presence of these larger-than-life figures within their environment. It is not defined by stylistic innovation, but by clarity of purpose, framing the action in a way that reinforces its magnitude. When the turtles move through the cityscape, the camera responds with energy, following their motion with intent. However, this approach is not without its challenges. While the imagery is polished, it does not always guide the viewer effectively. There is a distinction between presenting action and directing attention within it, and the film occasionally prioritizes the former. The speed of the sequences can overwhelm the framing, causing moments to pass without fully registering. The camera often reacts to movement rather than shaping it, resulting in sequences that maintain pace but lose clarity. Editing plays a central role in this dynamic. At its best, it reinforces momentum, ensuring the film rarely loses energy once it accelerates. The pacing prevents stagnation and maintains a consistent sense of urgency. Yet at other times, it contributes to the imbalance. Scenes transition too quickly, emotional beats are abbreviated, and sequences overlap without distinction. The rhythm becomes uneven, oscillating between controlled intensity and compressed chaos. This inconsistency reflects a broader challenge. The film strives to maintain speed without sacrificing coherence, intensity without losing structure. In attempting to sustain that balance, it occasionally compromises both. The direction, led by Jonathan Liebesman, maintains order within the film's expansive framework. The narrative remains structured, the sequences coordinated, and the overall progression intact. Yet there is a noticeable absence of a distinct creative signature. The film feels guided, but not distinctly shaped. It operates with control, but rarely elevates itself through a defining perspective. Even so, there are areas where the technical execution stands out. The visual effects work demonstrates a high level of precision. The integration between digital elements and physical environments is frequently effective, allowing the characters to occupy space with a convincing sense of scale. Movement is fluid. Interactions feel grounded within their own internal logic, and the overall presentation reflects a significant investment in detail and coordination. The musical score contributes in a similarly supportive capacity. It reinforces the energy of each sequence, amplifies momentum, and sustains intensity where the narrative may falter. It does not redefine the experience, but it enhances it, operating as a consistent driver of pace and tone. From a production standpoint, the film is cohesive. It possesses the structural components of a modern blockbuster: refined visuals, dynamic editing, coordinated direction, and a clear emphasis on spectacle. The tools are present, and they are used effectively. Yet the limitation lies in what those tools are supporting. The technical proficiency elevates the presentation, but the underlying narrative does not always provide the substance required to match that scale. The execution is polished, but the foundation lacks the depth needed to fully justify it. The result is a film that appears complete in construction, yet feels incomplete in impact, and that brings the focus to its overall identity. This is not a film that fully succeeds, nor is it one that collapses under its own weight. It occupies a middle ground, one defined by visible strengths and equally visible limitations. It is not neutral, but conflicted. Its elements do not fully align, and that tension defines the experience. On one side, there is clear value. The turtles themselves carry energy, bringing life to the film whenever they dominate the frame. Their presence injects confidence into the narrative, providing moments where the film feels aligned with its core identity. The visual scale, when paired with fluid movement, can be genuinely impressive. There are flashes of humor, moments of personality, and enough engagement to sustain attention. You can sense the intention to create something contemporary, accessible, and appealing to a new generation. And for certain viewers, that is sufficient. The surface-level experience delivers enough momentum to carry the film forward. On the other side, the limitations remain equally evident. The writing lacks depth. The antagonistic presence feels underdeveloped. Emotional resonance is limited, and the reliance on spectacle often replaces narrative substance rather than enhancing it. What ultimately stands out is not simply the presence of these issues, but the consistency with which they prevent the film from evolving into something more substantial. The narrative maintains forward motion, yet rarely accumulates meaning. It transitions from one moment to the next without allowing those moments to develop into something cohesive or lasting. It engages on a surface level, but it does not invite deeper connection. The experience remains observational. You follow the progression, but you are rarely drawn into it emotionally. The scale is evident, but it is not reinforced by corresponding weight. The visuals suggest magnitude, yet the narrative does not provide the foundation required to support it. And that contrast becomes the defining characteristic of the film. It is an experience that functions effectively in real time, yet struggles to extend beyond it. During its runtime, there is enough activity to sustain attention, enough motion, enough energy, enough continuous progression to prevent disengagement. But once that momentum concludes, little remains to hold on to. There is no singular emotional moment that defines it, no character arc that fully resolves, no thematic element that continues to resonate. It operates with volume, but without enduring impact. The intensity is present, yet it does not translate into something that lingers. It moves quickly, but speed alone does not create tension. It entertains, but it does not leave a lasting impression. For younger audiences or more casual viewers, the film achieves its purpose. It presents a streamlined experience, fast-paced, visually active, and immediately accessible. It delivers exactly what it promises: recognizable characters, consistent action, and a straightforward narrative. There is a clarity in that intention, and the film adheres to it with consistency. However, for those seeking a more layered experience, something defined by emotional depth, narrative weight, or lasting resonance, the film does not fully deliver. The elements that could support that depth are present, but only in fragments. They appear briefly, suggesting potential, yet they are never developed into a unified whole. This duality explains the divided response. One perspective recognizes its ability to entertain within its scope, to provide an engaging experience without overcomplication. The other recognizes the unrealized potential, the sense that, with the same components, something more cohesive and impactful could have emerged. At its core, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 resists simple classification. It is not ineffective. It functions with enough cohesion to deliver a complete experience, yet it does not reach the level its foundation suggests it could achieve. It neither collapses nor excels. Instead, it exists in that space between execution and potential. The characters are recognizable, the scale is present, the technical framework is solid. All the necessary elements are in place, yet they never fully align. And it is that gap, the distance between what the film is and what it might have been, that ultimately defines the experience.